this work, and many will know, considered one of the foremost chief execs in various polls. We've then got Dr. Bob Klaber, who's not just here as a token male presenter in a female-dominated world, you'll have noticed from the main stage today, but actually has some credibility to be here as leading, not from the top actually, but almost leading from any other position that he can find that's not at the top, and really leading clinical improvement in a very interesting way. And Elaine, who we've allowed to come down from Scotland, but only because she's from England originally, but doing some really fascinating work up in NHS Highlands, and I know she'd welcome anyone to visit, and I would encourage you to do so, because it's an absolutely stunning place up there to see. All are going to just share very briefly some thoughts before we open this session up for conversations, because always conscious there's some really good views in the room and things to discuss. So please again use this to prompt some questions. But we'll start off just with the panel giving their kind of just striking an elevator pitch of what they might want to say about leading for improvement.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm going to make 5 points. The first is that enthusiasm for innovation comes bottom up from an organisation, but the behaviour change that is required to really embed it in your organisation has to come from the top. The second thing I'd say is that patient and carer participation makes it so much easier. So we really benefited from getting that in right at the beginning. The third thing I'd say is if it isn't a struggle and if it isn't hurting, you're not doing it right. And failure is a big part of it. The fourth thing is, I think that it is now really obvious that improvement work has got to be part of the culture of any organisation. I don't think it's a choice. I think that we owe it and we ought to be held to account in a more rigorous way about how we're doing it, and we can talk some more about that. An approach, a methodology with very clear outcomes is really important. And the final thing I'd say is that I don't think you will ever successfully fully embed it in an organisation because it's a never-ending task.
Thank you. And for being on time, which is so rare. There's some pressure. Bob.
Okay. Wow, fantastic. Thanks, Navina. So, building on that, I think the organisational diagnosis, so I guess you've got a doctor speaking, diagnosis is really important. And for us at Imperial, really, really thinking hard and being very honest about what the issues and the opportunities were is absolutely crucial. So when you're thinking about building a culture of improvement, you've got to be really honest about your starting point. And that was very, very key for us. I think that I'm quite feisty about this which improvement method. It's about a consistent and coherent approach. They are largely all the same. The origins of them are from the same sort of space. So anybody who's got too strong a view that method X is in a different league to method Z, I'm very suspicious about. So consistent, coherent, and indeed the language around improvement, we sometimes get in the way of that. Doctors are terrible at talking about, any diagnosis that starts with idiopathic. For the record, that means I don't know. So I love explaining to families that it's the I don't know what the cause is diagnosis, and some people label it as. We do that with quality improvement as well. We put funny, complex language around it, and Mary alluded to that earlier. Permission and everything that Navina said before was really all about permission. And Adam, your lovely introduction, I sort of sit, whatever, I don't know, high, middle in an organisation. Any of us and all of us can give people around us permission by the way we behave. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And there's an awful lot of waiting for permission that goes on, which is very, very odd. We get very confused. We don't follow the small number of rules that we absolutely need to follow. And then we get caught in the treacle of a whole load of other things that aren't rules. There's some really interesting stuff going on around breaking the rules for better care. It's worth looking up that a good few hundred organisations worldwide have been involved in. So how do you generously give permission? I go around saying to people, I said that that's absolutely fine. Now, as you rightly introduced, I don't have any great hierarchical position, but it seems to quite work. Generally say, let them know that I said it was fine. I mean, like Bob Klaber gets you out of jail, but seriously, it seems to work. The final bit is connecting people with meaning and purpose. So I'm sort of curious about this one. So we've had this amazing week in the NHS and the celebrations and the increased waistline from all the cake. We have a group of staff who have self-selected to come and be part of an extraordinary movement, something that has amazing history and social purpose. And we systematically fail to connect people with that on a daily basis. So I describe my job as a complete privilege, and working half my life as a paediatrician gets me right in the sort of face of children and young people and their families. And one of the things that I try and get better and better at, and me saying this will make me a bit better at it, is connecting other people who don't have that privilege of being directly in the front line. Okay, you introduced yourself this morning and thought about that. We've got to make that connection better. The guys who work in finance, who work in HR, who work in IT do extraordinary things. They have taken on a role in the NHS for the same sense of purpose that I have as a paediatrician. It's absolutely the same sense. And I think we could do much better with connecting people up with that.
Thank you, Bob. Elaine.
Thanks, Adam. And you asked about how do you embed improvement into the DNA. So I think that comes into three areas that I'll touch on. One's being really passionate about it. The second one's being really smart about it. And the third one being intentional about it. So just briefly, for those of you that don't know anything about NHS Highlands, we're an integrated health and social care system covering about 41% of the landmass of Scotland. So it's a big area that we cover, but a small population, 320,000 people. Our quality journey has been over a decade now, but 10 years looking just through a Scottish patient safety lens. So that gave us a really good grounding. But if I come back to what we need to do about being intentional, the first thing we did is actually to excite the board, to make the board feel some responsibility for that. And coming from the top down, I think is absolutely critical. Training people and trying to get your executive team on board so they actually understand the language, they have the tools and techniques, they can show by example, and engaging clinicians, absolutely vital. So those things I think are important. And in the last session I was in, people were talking about branding. We decided to go with the brand of the Highland quality approach, and whatever people thought about it, not everybody bought in, still haven't, but actually that brand is very solid and very true. So that intention is quite clear to the organisation. The smart bit for me then about it is choosing an approach, just as you were saying, Bob, and sticking with it. I think we quite often dip into things and sometimes staff think, oh, it's okay to go away 5 minutes later. So having something and being really bold and holding your nerve over it, I think is important, and using the rigour of whatever methodology you choose so that you absolutely maximise the benefit of whatever tool it is you're using. But for us, we needed to change the culture of the organisation. So it's about making sure you impacted on the culture by engaging the frontline staff. And we did that by showing them their own data over time, displaying that openly so people could see what was going on. Setting that cadence then for a report out, so people knew every Friday there would be a report out. It's happened today without me there, and I'd expect that to happen every single week. And for us to be prepared to learn. So there's an element of humility that everybody, for all of us, it's a school day, and we have to get out there and learn. And the last area, being passionate about it, I think you hear that whenever I talk to colleagues, and I've heard it today from everybody I've spoken to, and that's just fantastic. So we all believe it's the right thing to do, and we need to infect people with that. Learning every day from the best in class, I think, is vital, and we work actually with colleagues in both of these organisations through various engagements across Europe, and actually stealing shamelessly from best in class and using that, adapting that for your own area, I think is vital. But for me, the final thing I would want you to take away is what I think is most important is getting out to the place where work happens, actually getting senior people to the shop floor, to go and see, to ask why, and to show respect is the most helpful thing that you can do to improve this movement, I would say.
Great, thank you. So that's the starting point for the conversation. Please do use this. We've had a number of questions, but like other ones you want to address, because we'll struggle to get to them all. But I'm going to start with a question. It's actually something I'd like you to all consider in the room. And it's just focusing on one lens, which is about waste. So some of you who've been following national politics will probably know yesterday, I think the Prime Minister spoke about funding settlement and whatever, and spoke about an idea of a war on waste. And in the wrong hands, that could be turned into managers who are wasting money in the NHS. You spend far too much on toilet paper when you can buy it in Aldi cheaper, and it could become very much like this. Or someone will have a good idea that we create a bit like the traffic cone hotline. We'll have a national app where everyone in the country can say where they've had a waste of time in the NHS, and we'll spend more money on managing it than we're actually saving. But if I put that challenge back into the room, I'm going to ask each of the panel to just share a view on how they address the challenge of reducing waste. But I'd also encourage you not use the questions, but not necessarily pose it as a question. Actually, in your organisation, if that is the answer, we are going to have to respond to how we reduce waste in the NHS. How should we do it from the perspective of the NHS, rather than allowing some policy wonk in the centre coming up with it, for all the value that those individuals provide, but there's a danger without the real world connection. So please use the opportunity to do that, and I'll play that in. And on Monday morning, the Secretary of State will hear what you're saying, so there's a real opportunity to shape that. But to the panel first, Navina.
So I'm surprised that we see talking about waste as a huge insult. It isn't. We think about waste every day at home. So any organisation, I can't think of any organisation that would say we are not worried about waste in our organisation. So I would say we need to take control of that. And we've done that now for a number of years. We talk about it all the time. We acknowledge it. It is not a failing. It is not an insult. Patients, staff can tell you all the time where we could do things more effectively. So if we take control of managing waste or better productivity or efficiency, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you use, it will raise emotions in people. Then those wonks, did you call them? Wouldn't have to impose if we've actually got something in place to actually tackle it.
And how do you go about that at the moment?
So it's at the moment in our most recent strategy, it is actually one of our objectives, and then we've got to measure our outcomes by it. We've got our Chief Finance Officer who has also looked at our quality improvement programs and projects, and try to demonstrate how we've been very effective, or more effective, cost effective, value for money. We use that sort of language to manage it all the time. But it's getting people. So we just had this campaign. How do we reduce waste? And hundreds of members of staff were coming up with ideas. I'll give you one example. In our corporate, we just changed the contract for collecting bins. Every office, we don't have bins. Now, there's one bin on each floor, and we all have to walk to and we recycle. But the cost savings is significant. So that's something really simple, and it makes you feel better when you can demonstrate that sort of thing.
Thank you. Bob.
So I think you've got to go on the front foot on Monday in a big way, because I totally agree with Navina. It's actually a real open door, and it's an invitation with a reframing of the conversation. So my slightly controversial bit is whose definition of waste would be the first thing. And one of the things that I've learned seeing John Norton, my friend and colleague who is a patient and part of our strategic lay partners, one of the things that group of amazing people have taught me and reminded me is valuing the patient's time. So it will bring me near to tears. My voice will probably break when I tell the story around how we waste people's time by what we do, by moving hospital appointments time and time again. So there's a financial lens on that, but there's a much more important lens. And I think staff's motivation, people go home crying and gut the opposite of joy, misery and a sense of what am I doing with the NHS because of the waste. And I think being able to give people, it's back to the permission bit, being able to give people the support to quickly and in an agile way do things that make a difference around that becomes very key. And it makes me think a bit of the marginal gain story. So the sports men and women in the room, being a big part of, and indeed, England and penalties is the topic of the conversation at the moment. But how really little things can add up to much bigger things. we don't tell that story very well. And if staff can feel that the really little changes that they're making help to a bigger picture, you start to get into a really interesting place.
Elaine.
For me, it's really hard to convince people that you need to improve if you don't admit there's waste in the system. So that, for me, is the first point. I stood up on stage in Inverness and said, we waste time, we waste people's money. This is a really difficult thing for me to stand and say, but I said it. I was absolutely taken apart by the press. I had people stalking me on Twitter for saying the NHS was wasting money and what on earth was I doing being the chief executive. But everywhere you go, if you go to the place where work happens, you will see waste. You will ask people in their day-to-day work, is there any waste in your system? They won't stop telling you about waste. Their frustration, as Bob says, is how do you get rid of that waste? And that's what we need to do, is give them the tools, the techniques, and the time, frankly, to redesign their own parts of the system to take the waste out. And that's what we can give, is the permission to do that, and to do that very effectively. The people that know how to take the waste out are right there at the front line. We just need to give them the time and the tools to be able to do it. But first, they have to have the waste eyes. They have to be able to see it. Most of them can. A lot of us haven't been able to see it. But once you've got those waste eyes, you'll never not see the waste again.
That's a phrase, the waste eyes, that's one to take away. Okay, thank you. And again, please do add your reflections on the question list. I'm going to go to a question here, and it really links a couple of things. So something you said, Navina, about, I think it's really clear that QI is not optional. Those who heard Mary speak earlier on would kind of argue there's a strong case that she might say QI is not really evidence-based, it's not working, you know, the gut feel that it is the right position. And then it links to the top question here, how can we influence all chief execs to champion and sponsor QI at the heart of their organisation? So kind of reflections on, there's a bit of an echo chamber risk in the room, that the people who get it. How do we reach out to the people that are saying, QI, forget that, no evidence for it?
So I'm a chief executive. We're, I don't know, I think I recognise the chief executives in the room, so I'll speak for us. We're quite vulnerable. Find our weak spot, and then tailor your pitch around how QI is going to help us with our weak spots. And QI can help in anything, at home, with your family, with your shopping, everything. It's as simple as that.
Excellent.
My thinking at the moment is around education and learning, and the sort of wonderful quotes of, if you think education's expensive, try not doing it. And I think there's a lens around that. And the trick is, if you see the sort of, Navina's given us a really helpful tactic, if you see the sort of chink in the door as well, the bit about sort of running fast. I think one of the things that, a tactic, if you like, that we did in Imperial, it's in our first year of doing our programme, we did a sort of year and a half's work, is what I described, just sort of got a bit ahead of the curve. And the other bit is about really giving yourself the cover that this is a long game. So, when I first presented this to our board, I think there wasn't a lot of understanding around it, and I talked about the fact that I was there for the next 40 years, and they were busy doing maths about whether I was 25, whether the retirement age was quite a lot older. But there is something about the long-term piece in this. That doesn't mean there can't be some short-term or short to medium-term gains, but really saying this is a chance to put some seeds in the ground and to cultivate and grow at a time when so much else is very, very short-term.
So we used some of those tricks as well, and in fact what we did was we sent some of our most cynical clinicians to the places of excellence, and they came back saying, we have to do this. Now, I was already persuaded, but now so were they, and they persuaded the board. So once you can get that move from cynic to champion, it's very powerful, and people then are really interested in doing something quite different. So yeah, that would be my advice. Find out who really doesn't think this works, and try and get them in front of some of the best in the world. The Don Berricks, the Derek Felix, the John Tussauds, whoever you've worked with, and see if they can inspire them for the work that they've done over very many years now.
Great, thank you. So the next area I want to pick up is culture. So there's the kind of question frame, but also, Mary said she doesn't talk about culture because it's too big. Dido was all about culture, and we've heard it as a theme through. This kind of question here, leadership, culture, improvement, big words, and kind of people might accept it, but actually, what's the nuts and bolts that sits beneath it that really starts to affect that, based on your experience? Please do.
So all systems and organisations have a culture. So it's, I think we need to talk about the culture in our organisation, and there are a lot of people who can help us do that. And then it's about deciding what kind of a culture you want to have, and I think it would be very difficult to justify not having an improvement culture, and that isn't part of the culture, or that you want to nurture. And leadership, well, whatever culture you've got, leadership is what drives it. So if you've got a punitive or a harsh culture, well, you've got leadership that's driving that. If you've got an improvement culture, you've got a leadership that's driving that, and works with the whole organisation to make it happen. The final thing I think that's really powerful that we've found is that if you want to change behaviour, really, I can't say this enough, patients and carers coming into the room and telling us what it really feels like and pointing out to us some of the things that we hold on to make no sense and are actually destructive is really, really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I pick up on the behaviour bit, and again, the clinical interaction between patients and staff is a wonderful place and space to go. Funny, we all tend to be on really best behaviour around that. We generally do incredibly well in that setting. And then behaviour so bringing the patient in the room is a wonderful modificator of behaviour. What's that all about, is my question on it. I think there is something about how we all behave. The conversations I have with medical students are really about how they behave. I will say, people are watching you the whole time about how you behave. The more senior you get, the probably more people watching you, and if your behaviour is wonderful or terrible, the impact is higher. But absolutely all of us, all the time, about how we behave, how we influence on the people around us. And I think being able to put mechanisms in place and behaviours in place that coach and support and encourage and indeed stand up to where behaviours aren't right. And really, really little things. What do we like with our mobile phones about the way we behave in a meeting? What do we like around looking people in the eyes when we're talking to them, about holding doors open and about saying thank yous? That stuff is absolutely at the heart of being civil, about creating a space where people feel valued. And I think we sometimes, with all the noise and everything else goes on, forget about those things. And all of us, absolutely all of us, can do that all the time. Thank you.
We set the culture, don't we, in the way that we behave. It is that simple. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you behave, as you say, how you interact. But it's also, for me, important how you spend your time, because people watch how you spend your time. So if you give your time freely to improvement work and you're open to improving yourself, open to saying, I got that wrong, we've changed our minds, we've done some work on it, we need to do something different, actually they'll feel it's a safe space to be able to do that themselves. So for us, we've trained all of the whole executive team to run workshops, to run events, and just by participating in those, giving freely of what actually is quite a lot of time, people say, well, if they can do it, it must be cool. And that really does set the tone, and I think that strongly influences the culture in the organisation.
Thank you. The next thing I'm going to pick up is again at the top, this sense of pace. So we've already referenced, and I spoke in a video earlier on about, I think patience is a real challenge for us in this work. But actually there's a danger we move the narrative the other direction and say, oh, we won't get anything for another 10 years because that's the Virginia Mason story. And as I think one of you said, actually it doesn't stop us getting results. So driving pace, but not inappropriately driving pace, what's the answer?
Shall I kick off that? I think what a theme for the last 20 minutes for me has been about being a bit tactical about, and I think we've all given some thoughts on that, and indeed all the conversations through the day. There's smart enough people around here to be, we've got to get clever and tactical about this as well. And part of how we support each other and learn from each other is a really, really good way. So there's something about the cover that we can give to each other, and Elaine told a story around her senior leaders. So I think I think we're all pretty convinced that this is a long-term game to really get into. How do you allow yourself to stay in the long-term game? You've got to be quite smart along the way. And that's about constantly looking and learning and reflecting on different things, about admitting when you've got things wrong, about being smart about the networks and the people that you take on board around this. And I'm sitting here listening to two wonderful people outside thinking, what are some of the tactics that we do? Constantly reappraising the driver diagram of our work, sort of sits in my back pocket and is dogged and keeps moving and changing as I'm learning and thinking more and thinking where the emphasis be. So I think constantly being prepared to work out, but not just going and chasing. The idea of chasing the money on this just never felt right to me as a way to get staff mobilised. I'm pretty convinced that some of that will fall out of it, but it's not the way to go into the conversation.
So I'm going to ask you guys to come in, I'm going to add something to the question in terms of, if we take Bob's point that you kind of have to earn the right to the long term by demonstrating impact, how do you capture that? Because it's something that we regularly encounter. You say to people, that's brilliant, and so well, we never really captured the impact of that. How are you making the case in your work, in your organisation?
So methodology makes you capture things, and so there's a discipline about that, which is quite important. And then I would also say that there are certain things you have to fix, and you have to fix it straight away. But that's not counterproductive or doesn't go against improvement work. So there's things you have to fix. There is the culture change, which is about behaviour change, which is something you have to have much more patience. But the two can happen at the same time. And always use feedback, use data and measurement. I think that's really important.
Yeah, we'd also be absolutely wedded to that using the data, but again for me, having something which has a regular report out, something that people know you are actually going to go back and ask them next week. It has to be, we have an accountability role that the exec team come to, and we just walk in half an hour, I think you might have been at it, Adam, so it's important, and I would have said to you at the time, that report out, where we're actually trying to see are we delivering on those big dials, the things that are the true North metrics. It's important though that that's an accountability wall, not a humiliation wall. Okay, so how do you pitch that for people, where you're trying to help solve their problems, but recognise what the issues are, sets that, again, that sort of sense right through the organisation, because you're expecting those conversations to be happening at every level through the organisation. So clear line of sight then from the board to the floor, and making sure everybody understands what the objectives are. Now those will change, as you say, it's a dynamic thing, and actually we throughout our very clever objectives to our organisation found that they hated them. The way they were worded was just wrong, it didn't resonate when we were talking, for example, about delayed discharge and reducing the percentage. They said to us, we don't like that, we actually like stopping people being away from their families. And of course that was the right way to word it, still the same objective. So actually being very sensitive to what people want, but being able still to measure it. We could clearly measure the number of people delayed in our hospitals. You have to be able to be fleet of foot to do both of those.
So let's hope we can celebrate the time when the letter comes out from NHS Improvement saying we'd like to measure how much we're keeping people away from the family.
Absolutely.
Rather than some other language. Look, we've run out of time again, but I just want to pick up on one point you've mentioned, Elaine, there about the importance of sending people to go and look at where it's done really well. If you want to go and see where it's done really well, these organisations will welcome you in. These individuals will welcome you in and send you real cynics, and I'm sure they'll come away enthused and inspired. But would you just like to thank the panel for sharing?